Welcome back, baseball fans, to a very special episode of the Canadian Baseball Network podcast. We're here today to talk about the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame induction ceremony that took place a couple weeks ago. Obviously, a very special day for the sport in this country.
Yeah, and obviously a great weekend every year. You get a chance to kind of reflect on people who've been a part of the history of the game in this country who maybe don't get the recognition always, throughout the year. And so this is always a special weekend. Of course, to get to do it in beautiful St. Mary's, one of the real gems in southwestern Ontario, beautiful place for what was, I'd imagine, Matt, a beautiful weekend.
Yeah, and I'm a little embarrassed, I think, to say this about myself, but this was actually my first time going to the induction ceremony. And just the professionalism that is put on with the access, the Hall of Fame, obviously, it's a step back in time to celebrate all things Canadian baseball. Just a really special weekend, and I was just privileged to be a part of it.
Yeah, and I'd imagine too, like you probably saw a lot of different people there, not just the people being inducted into the Hall of Fame, but sort of, Canadian baseball apparatus. I'm sure it would have been a real sort of who's who there.
Yeah, an absolute celebration of Canadian baseball, which that's exactly
That's what we
exactly
do.
what I'm here for. I'll do that every weekend if you want to do it, but obviously once a year we get together to celebrate the inductees and they take their rightful place in the game's history.
So 6 inductions this year. And a real kind of variety of people who've contributed to baseball in Canada in different ways. And maybe we can start with Gerry Snyder, who was a politician and a big part of bringing the Expos to Montreal.
And that's the thing about these induction weekends. You get to celebrate people that maybe aren't necessarily the big names or the stories that you don't necessarily know. And Gerry Snyder, for people that don't know, like you said, played a huge part in bringing the Expos to Canada, to Montreal, and bringing Major League Baseball to Canada. I mean, what a way to start this induction ceremony, this podcast, and talking with Gerry Snyder and talking about Gerry Snyder and the Montreal Expos. We've talked about before on this podcast and how big of an impact that franchise had on this country and fans across Canada.
Well, we spoke with Danny Gallagher about a year ago to talk about his book, and he talked about how integral Gerry was to bringing the Expos to Canada. And it's easy for us now to look back in hindsight. Well, of course they would have come to Canada at some point, but Gerry went down to these meetings throughout the 60s, and in 1962 was basically said, well, you don't have a big league stadium, so it's not happening. He kept going back, right? Like just kept trying, and eventually they got it, right? And like think about the butterfly effect of that and how many different impacts that has had in Canada for baseball. I mean, Matt, this is Gerry's one of the more important people in Canadian baseball history when you look at it from that lens, and so it's incredible that his family got to see his contributions be recognized here.
Yeah, think about it. Is there the Toronto Blue Jays if there's no Montreal? Like what that moment in history where Montreal was granted a franchise really changed baseball in this country, and obviously Gerry very worthy of being inducted in the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame.
Because it's not always just the owner or the people with the money who kind of driving the bus. In this case, it's a politician who is passionate about Montreal, passionate about baseball, passionate about the sports in the community, and doing it for the right reasons. Nowadays too, like we look at pro sports, it's all about money, right? Money, money, money. But Gerry reminds us, and sort of this induction to me reminds me at least of like why we watch sport and why we want sport in our cities. It's not just for money, it's to create a community. And I think he saw that clearly, a visionary.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at Quebec in general, one of the more popular baseball provinces. Players coming out of there left, right, and center. And the Expos had a lot to do with that. Whether these players watched the Expos growing up or you were, a little bit younger at the time, that definitely had an impact on a many generations of baseball players in Quebec. And even now, I mean, anytime you hear, expansion talk or a team move, up come the Expos. What about Montreal? It's still having an impact today.
I'll give you a recent connection. How about Vladimir Guerrero Jr.? The fact he was born in Montreal and his dad, right? In the 94 strike, Matt, I mean, think about that. Like, I know we get into it, but just before we go to a clip here, I just want to say, like, that 94 strike, we talked to Danny about it last year. I was thinking about it today, like how much that also changed the history of baseball in Montreal, because who knows what happens if that's the case. Everyone talks about the team leaving in 05, but there was a lot that happened in those 10 years prior to that, and the strike was a huge part of that. They were a great team that year, so very disappointing, I'd imagine, for Expos fans of a certain ilk, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that 94 season, that's kind of it. That's baseball history too. What if,
Yeah. The one that got away.
That World Series, you know, what could the Expos have done, and would that have changed the course of the franchise? Obviously, we don't know now. We were lucky to have the Expos for all those years. I'd love to see them come back. I mean, that logo is iconic. Everything about that franchise is special to baseball in this country.
So his family, Gerry Snyder's family, was very proud, obviously, their father's contributions and recognition. And his son, Gerry Snyder, gave a speech during their induction ceremony. Here's a quick clip from it.
I think the most important thing here is that he was all-around sportsman. And he had what it took to become a sportsman, but also have the focus and dedication and inspiration to strive for something bigger than he would be able to achieve without his acute interest in bringing something that was inconceivable at the time to Major League Baseball.
So again, you know, a huge contribution to Canadian baseball in the form of Gerry Snyder, and rightfully inducted into the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. And by the way, like if you haven't had a chance to go out there, it is amazing. All the different plaques, you learn so much about, even if you just seeing different last names and realizing, oh, that park is named after this person, you know. Making our way though to different parts of Canadian baseball history, and making our way to another inductee, Arleene Noga. And Arleene, someone who, you know, sort of a completely different area of Canadian baseball, coming from Saskatchewan, and in the 40s, you know, carved out quite a legacy. She was signed by the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, and you know, like she played in 300 consecutive games. She got her the nickname Iron Lady, right? I think that's really cool, and you know, a chance to sort of reflect on, you know, the impact of Arleene, as well as another inductee posthumously, Amanda Essay, who've both contributed greatly to women's baseball and then the growth of the game in this country, Matt.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the Iron Lady, so the Cal Ripken, I
Yeah.
guess, of women's baseball. And you look at the growth of the game in Canada on the women's side. We've had Mia Volk on this podcast before. We talk about it a lot. Alexis Brudnicki's joined us. The impact of women in this game can't be overlooked. And the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame does such a good job of honoring baseball contributions across the board, whether it's women, men, whatever the case may be, no matter what part of the country. And this is just another example of that. And a very special add-in is her involvement in the movie A League of Their Own, Jackson.
Yeah, like it's interesting to me. She played, right, and then she just kept giving back to the game and kept staying involved. So much so, and you know, following her AAG PBL career, she was brought on board as a technical advisor for the film, and she taught many of the actors kind of how to the nuances of the game, right? She it says here on the Baseball Hall of Fame website, you know, she taught Rosie O'Donnell the nuances of playing shortstop. She taught Madonna how to slide, right? Really cool stuff. And in fact, Arlene's daughter, Carol Lee Scott, actually spoke with us about Arlene's involvement in the production of A League of Their Own. Here's take a listen.
And then more as that movie, League of Their Own, came into production, and then she was contacted to be a consultant on that. That's, I think, when my moment of really starting to understand the significance of her playing professionally. Yeah. And I don't know if she even referred to it as being professional ball. Like it was just what she did. Like she loved it.
So yeah, really cool stuff there, Matt. And you know, Arleene too, someone who, like I said prior to that clip, someone who, you know, kind of was involved in baseball her whole life. You know what I mean? And I think that's really admirable. Just gotta love the sport so much. And I think that's a lot of what this sort of Hall of Fame induction is also about. Like these people like lived the game. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about Gerry Snyder and the, you know, lasting impact that the Expos had and his work. I mean, Arleene literally lived the game, like you said, and gave back for years and years. What an impact that has, and on women in the game, you know, because that's so important, and that's such a big part of Canadian baseball history. And the Canadian Baseball Canada women's national team kind of paved the way from the kind of the outset for hundreds and thousands of women to play the game.
And should mention, by the way, thank you to Trevor, our field correspondent, for that clip as well. A couple clips here. And And I guess that transitions well to Amanda Say, sort of a more recent a part of Canadian baseball history. Someone who had joined the women's national team in 2005. She's born in Prince George, became one of the longest tenured players, two-way player. Matt, like, just so much to say about Amanda. Inducted posthumously, she passed away in January of 2022. And so her family was there, and they were so just thankful for this contribution of her, or the recognition of her contribution, I should say, Matt.
Yeah, and I mean, you said she joined the national team in 2005 and played right up until 2021.
Yeah,
I mean, some people would love to put on the Canada uniform once. She did it for 16 years. I mean, think about that contribution. And I was, in preparation for this podcast, I was watching a video. The Toronto Blue Jays honored her after her death, and they put on some clinics and that sort of stuff. And it panned to the players, and it's all young women.
Yeah,
I thought that was very touching and really showed firsthand the grassroots impact that Amanda Asay had on baseball in this country. And that's what this is all about. This is why I love the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. This is why I love baseball in Canada. We're going to get to the bigger names like the José Bautistas in a little bit. But I think these stories are what make baseball in this country.
Yeah, and you're a young girl watching the sport, and to get a chance, if you watch Major League Baseball, it's all men, right? You watch pro ball, it's all men. To get a chance to see someone like Amanda in the spotlight, and it's, yeah, you know what, I can do that too. I see someone, it's representation, right? We talk about all the representation in media and sport. What does that look like? And not just that, but Amanda and her contributions and her accomplishments, right? I mean, like, in 2016 at the Women's Baseball World Cup, she tossed a complete game, right, to Canada beat Chinese Taipei 2-1, and also batted .333 in the tournament. Just like incredible contributions, obviously, all around the diamond. And it's remarkable that she played for as long as she did, and multi-sport athlete as well. Just incredible athlete, incredible story, incredible Canadian
hockey. She played Division I hockey as well.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's so fitting, I think, that Arleene Noga goes in this year. Amanda Asay goes in. Arleene kind of kicked the door down, so to speak, in a lot of ways for women in this country to play the game. And Amanda's impact over 16 years, and I can't get over that. 16 years, and that a 16-year career doing anything is impressive, let alone playing at the top level for your country. And then who knows where this goes from here. Again, this is the lasting legacy that these players and these people have going into the Hall of Fame. Who knows who Amanda Asay has now inspired that we might be talking about 20 years from now and passing the torch to the next generation. So just a really special honor for her and her family.
So Amanda Asay joins Arleene Noga and Gerry Snyder. That makes 3 inductees, the first 3. And the next one will be, well, we know him quite well. Actually, let's talk about Eric Bedard first. We've never had a chance to have Eric Bedard on a podcast. We have had another inductee on our show. Eric Bedard gets the nod into the Hall of Fame as well. A hell of a career for him, for the lefty. I think he's the leader among Canadian big league lefties in starts, innings pitched, and strikeouts. If you asked me, I probably would have said like James Paxton, but Eric Bedard, a guy who was a little before my time, Matt, but hell of a career.
Yeah, this one was a fun one for me because growing up, when I was a pitcher, and when I thought of Canadian pitchers, I thought of Eric Bedard. I thought of Rich Harden. I thought of those guys. Those are kind of my childhood guys that I watched coming up. To see him go in was definitely special. I remember him pitching for the Orioles primarily. But when I think of Eric Bedard, I think of Canadian baseball. I think of one of the guys that kind of made me fall in love with the game growing up as a young player and wanting to strive to be like a guy like that.
You look at his numbers too, like big strikeouts. Like the modern game would have appreciated him probably even more than it did, kind of 20 years ago, because he had length, he's a lefty, and he could really strike guys out, kept a nice tidy ERA in the 3s, like especially in the steroid era or just post-steroid era. Like, that's crazy, man.
Yeah, I mean, he had a great career. I mean, he was one of the guys that, you turn the TV on as a baseball fan when he was pitching. I mean, especially playing for the Orioles. They played the Blue Jays so much. It was It was a common theme throughout the season. And anytime Eric Bedard was on the TV, I was watching.
Well, you think about it too, the fact he played for the Orioles for all those years, going up against the Sox, the Yankees, good teams in a tough division. And they played way more back then too. So yeah, huge, really good numbers. Those numbers just feels like they've just aged better and better. So congratulations to Eric Bedard. Obviously well deserving, and a guy who, it's again an opportunity to recognize, Canadian baseball contributions across the board, right? And that's really what I love about this weekend. You see it again exemplified there. I guess next up would be Matt, familiar face, Greg Hamilton, inducted for all his contributions to the national team over the years.
Yeah, I think, at the actual ceremony, I don't know if anyone took more time than Greg Hamilton to speak to the media. He was in a room. We were just having a conversation, and we were there for half hour, 45 minutes, just talking about obviously his induction and what the game means to him and his career, but also the impact that, he's had on other players and how this is a guy that gets it. Okay. A lot of what he talked about wasn't about himself and his own accolades. It was the impact that he has on others and building that personal connection to build the program. We're going to cut to a clip shortly about that, him helping build that program. But it's the personal connection. And I asked him at one point what he wants his legacy to be and how he wants to be remembered. And he basically said, as someone that cared about the players. And he talked for maybe 5 minutes, and he didn't once mention the actual game on the field. And I think that's really special and kind of shows who Greg Hamilton is. Yeah,
that's one thing I noticed too when we've had the chance to talk to him. He's very humble, right? And very always focused on kind of development, and also like these are people, he always sees the humanity in baseball and in sport. And I think you need that in any kind of role, but especially when you're in a development role. I think that would, you've got kids coming in from all over the place, whatever experience they might have. Really, really gracious with his time with you, Matt. And in fact, you asked him about the importance of building out that program we were just talking about for player development and for growth of the game in Canada. And here's what he had to say.
Tremendously important because, you think of the players, and for us, like to be able to have a year-round junior program. You bring in kids on the front end of their development career, and they move through, and the give back and the care and the connectivity to the generations is everything. We'll have a training camp with our younger team, and we'll have major league alumni that come down and work with the kids for 10, 12 days, and the impact of that is tremendous. And they're not just, as they say, they dig in, they care, because they've had that uniform on, they know what it means, and they care about helping the next generation. And it's impactful for them too, because they stay connected, there's meaning. They champion a young kid, they see that young kid get drafted, they see a young kid go to a scholarship and then eventually get drafted, get into the minor leagues, get into pro ball, and you're kind of supporting one another.
Baseball Canada is very unique in a sense that I feel like the generations kind of come together. It's kind of like the passing of, we've talked about this before, not only on the field, but it's kind of the passing of the torch. And you see the alumni come back. You see them come back and coach. Larry Walker, for instance, there's a ton of guys. And that's a culture that's in a large part, not just Greg Hamilton, but he has had a major impact on building that.
Yeah. And you see it now. Like you look at we were talking about it a few minutes ago, just the amount of Canadians in the bigs, and it feels like more and more, and just how much has changed even in the last 10 years, Matt. Like you look around, it's like most teams have a Canadian now in their system, and that hasn't always been the case.
And it keeps going back to the national team program. You hear that all the time, whether that's on the Jays broadcast, whether that's at the World Base. You hear about the national team program, whether that's the junior national team, the senior men's national team, the women's national team that we just got done talking about. It just the way it's been built, it's set up for success, and Greg Hamilton has played a major role in that.
Yeah, embodying so much of what you want, in a program, and to be able to. He mentioned in that big chat he had with you guys also about seeing like a guy like Lindor, right? And he seems to have it all together, and he's rangy out there, but you don't see the 17-year-old version of him, in the Florida Complex League or wherever, figuring it out. Right? They look like they have it all together in front of 50,000, but you got to get there.
And that's got to be so rewarding, right? Yeah. And to see them at that level, they're good. They have the tools. The tools are there. You can see that. But it's, it's helping them develop to become the player that they want to be, whether that's college baseball, professional baseball, or just having a personal impact on these young men's lives and being a positive role model. It's got to be a very rewarding feeling to have Greg Hamilton's job.
I don't know if you've ever watched Ted Lasso, but I would imagine that a lot of what player development is a lot like that, where you are a coach, yes, but you're also a mentor and trying to get the most out of people to be the best version of themselves. And I get a lot of that from Greg, and also in that clip, certainly, that we played earlier. So that makes our way, I guess, to our last inductee. And, we talk about impact and stuff. And like this guy, José Bautista, one of the greatest Jays ever, had an impact like an impact over his whole career. But then there's the moment, right? There's the bat flip. That is such a iconic moment in Canadian sports history. And what a weekend it would have been for him as well, man.
Yeah, a lot of Bautista jerseys, a lot of Blue Jays apparel walking around the Hall of Fame over that weekend. He met with the media kind of in a scrum situation. And you could tell it really meant a lot to him. You saw people, if you saw his speech on Sportsnet, parts of it, he was emotional, and you saw his name going to level of excellence. He showed that same kind of emotion. Not necessarily a guy that you think of showing that kind, but yeah, you could tell how much it meant to him for sure.
And, a guy who really, you got to remember, he was kind of the only draw for a while with the Jays, right? And when he got good and they signed him right away, you remember that Anthopoulos gave him a pretty big deal, I think 5 or 6 years. And I remember just thinking, okay, like he's not also going to the Yankees then. You know what I mean? Like there was a time where you just thought, well, now that he's good, he's going to leave. You know what I mean? Or they're going to trade him or whatever. Because I feel like maybe that was just me, but it was just kind of like we don't deserve her or whatever, right? And then he just sticks around, and the team kind of he makes those changes to his swing, but the changes stayed, and he just keeps performing. He just keeps hitting home runs. He doesn't stop, and then all of a sudden he culminates in 2015, of course. But there's so much of the story prior to 2015, and the bat flip, of course, which cemented his legacy. But so much before that is really cool, Matt.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about the impact. I mean, look at the number of fans that latched onto those 2015, 2016 teams. And he came over as a relatively nobody. He had bounced around. He came over from the Pirates. No one really knew what to expect. Takes off with the Blue Jays. I remember growing up, there was, my entire life watching the Blue Jays up until that 2015 team. The playoffs seemed like so far out of reach. I remember, I think they won 84, 86 games under John Gibbons the first time. And I was like, oh my goodness, they won 86 games. And it was like, but they're not going to make the playoffs. Like Blue Jays and playoff baseball, that's just doesn't go hand in hand. And then 2015, and since then, this has essentially been a team that's been very consistently competitive, other than maybe a couple of years there when Vladdy and Bo were coming up. But that's a lot to do with José Bautista and that team kind of reigniting the excitement for baseball in not only Toronto, but across the country. You saw registration numbers go up. You saw new fans engaging with the game. And the impact is just incredible from, one guy, not one guy. I mean, the entire team played a part in it, but he was the face of those teams.
Yeah. And even though Donaldson won the MVP that year, Bautista was a monster that season. I think he finished 8th in MVP voting that year. Like he was that lineup obviously was incredible, but he was the centerpiece of all of it always with those teams. And I remember too, it would have been when they played the Royals in the LCS there, where Bautista hits a home run, I think in Game 6, and it wasn't the bat flip, and it wasn't it was in Kansas City, but it was a huge home run. I think it was to tie it or to put them within 1. And I thought, man, if they come back to win this game, like that's almost as big as the bat flip home run from like a win probability standpoint. They didn't. That's life. Could you imagine, Matt, if they end up losing that bat flip game or whatever, like it's, or he doesn't bat flip, like these moments that happen and don't happen. And it's so special. And for him, for the moment to be him specifically, it could have been Russell Martin. It could have been Ryan Goins who had the big hit, right? Like it could have been Deoner Navarro who had the big hit. No, it was José Bautista, the face of the franchise. It was just perfect. The stars aligned in that moment for that iconic bat flip.
We talk about the expectations with Vladdy now signing this contract now. Those expectations, like I said, kind of go back to 2015. Since that time, fans expect this team to be competitive. And that's kind of where it started. So it's just it's interesting to be a part of history like that, where it's almost like the franchise had a rebirth, thanks in large part to José Bautista.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I got revitalized. I was in high school. I remember all my friends, like it was a thing, very much so, that you got back into the game of baseball because this team was so good and they had a chance to win the World Series. And he was kind of the face of that. And quite the honor for him to, I'd imagine that, because you asked him about kind of reflecting on his legacy and stuff. And that's such a huge part of his legacy, is like putting the game back on the map in Canada. And you also asked him, like, what does this day mean to you? Obviously, I'm sure there was a lot of emotions, and here's his response.
It means a lot. It's a great honor. It's not many people that have the privilege to even be considered, let alone get inducted. So I truly appreciate it. It was a great moment when I received the call, and yeah, I feel very, very proud and very honored.
So I also asked him, you mentioned a little bit about, guys coming, performing in Toronto and then leaving, but there's also this notion that guys don't want to come to Toronto.
Yeah.
There's hesitation. It's a different country, which is, we know as Canadians that's ridiculous and all that comes with it. But José Bautista said it too. He said it's just, guys fall in love with this city, and having a country behind you as a player is something that can't be explained. And you just have to experience. And that was a big thing about what he talked about when I asked him that question.
Yeah, and you see it too, like in 2015, the way that the country kind of rallied around the team as the summer went on. I thought that was so cool. There was such a build, right? And then we get to the playoffs and the hype was so crazy. And yeah, I was just thinking about how, like, clutch moments, right? The Jays fans have seen some clutch moments, right? The walk-off from Joe Carter, Bautista's bat flip. They want to see it now from Vladdy, right? Like, that's, I think it's an interesting point you make about Bautista, and sort of he paved the way. He showed fans, hey, this is the standard, right? The best players perform in the biggest moments.
This franchise has been very lucky, and I think it's hard to kind of understand that in the moment. But you went from a superstar player in José Bautista right into a superstar player, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. There's been two franchise players back to back that fans have been able to watch. And sometimes that gets lost, right? You get so caught up in the wins and losses in the day-to-day. But just take a moment, if you're listening to this, to sit back and appreciate these players and what you've been able to watch over the last decade, and hopefully, decades to come.
You also asked him then, Matt, I think it's a good time to throw to this, how do you kind of want to be remembered, right? How do you want your career to be remembered in specific? And here's what he had to say about that.
Hopefully people notice that I was somebody that went out there and tried not to make excuses and just figure out how to get it done, and was just putting in a good effort day in and day out.
So yeah, really grateful to, you, Matt, and Trevor as well, for getting us these quotes and for going to the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame induction weekend in beautiful St. Mary's to cover all this stuff. Some great stories being told. Again, like I said at the beginning, you get a wide breadth of different contributions to Canadian baseball. Maybe it's the politician side, the business side with the Expos. Maybe it's recent, right, with Bautista or Amanda Asay, right? Whether it's planting the seeds or kind of seeing them, kind of grow and sprout. I think that's the beauty of the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. Matt, any other, comments from your time there before we say goodbye?
Yeah, just a big thank you to the Hall of Fame for doing this. Obviously, every year, the Hall of Fame is such a big, like we talked about over and over, big piece of this game's history and just bringing it all together. A huge thank you also to the Canadian Baseball Network editor, Kevin Glue, for helping set all this up. JP Antonacci was there providing great coverage. Trevor Fitzpatrick, who we mentioned. It was just a great time, and looking forward to seeing next year's inductees and doing it all again a year from now.
So for Jackson Farough and Matt Betts, thank you for joining us on the CBN podcast. Got much more coming up down the pike here. And for now, we'll see you soon.